Good evening, everyone. I'm Tom Saliba, a member of the board of Freeport Speech. Welcome to our 6th event of the 2024 season. In our audience tonight are also a number of our former Freeport Speech speakers. And I hope I haven't omitted any of you. And the reason for the 10-minute delay is that, you talk about timing, okay? One of our speakers This was not rehearsed, believe me. I held it up for 10 minutes because one of our speakers was actually talking at Harvard earlier today, and I got a text message that he was going to come up and join us, and it was running late, so that's why the 10 minutes. It was not Governor Patrick, it was not Clayton Spencer. But tonight we have with us former speakers Susan Thornton, Harold Pacious, Glenn Cummings, Joe Lockhart, Colin Woodard, Jeff Thaler, Cara Palamountain, and all the way from Atlanta and Boston and the CDC, Maine's own Dr. Nirav Shah. Would you all please stand up? Tonight, we get to focus on leadership. The greatest payback for me as a member of the Freeport Speech Board is getting to meet and become friends with our distinguished speakers. And at the very top of that list for me is Clayton Spencer, who has become a trusted advisor to all of us here at Freeport Speech. Our two speakers are acknowledged leaders who come from very different backgrounds. Clayton Spencer herself is the daughter of a college president, and she grew up witnessing leadership on a daily basis. As a child, Clayton used to sneak across campus to watch commencements and spent her dinners discussing the issues facing the college. A graduate of Phillips Exeter Academy, Williams College, magna cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa, Oxford, and the Yale Law School. During Clayton's distinguished career, she led and directed education legislation and policy in the United States Senate, working for the late Senator Edward Kennedy. During 15 years at Harvard University, she became vice president, leading and directing all policy initiatives for the university. And most recently, for 11 years, led Bates College as its 8th president. Quoting one of her students, "She cares. When you lead with passion and care, you usually get some great outcomes." And that's what we've seen with President Clayton Spencer. Deval Patrick epitomizes the American dream and the greatness of America. Growing up on the south side of Chicago in a public housing project, 2-bedroom apartment, Governor Patrick was raised by his mother, who traces her roots to American slaves in Kentucky. While in middle school, he was referred by a teacher to the ABC, a Better Chance program, scholarship program, and won a full scholarship to the prestigious Milton Academy in Massachusetts. He went on to Harvard College, where he graduated cum laude, and Harvard Law School, JD, cum laude. I could take a full hour and a half telling you about his accomplishments, but I will instead list just a few highlights of his legendary career. United States Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division under President Clinton, General Counsel of Texaco, Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary at the Coca-Cola Company, 2-term Governor of Massachusetts, a presidential candidate, and the acknowledged leader in the field of impact investing. True leadership inspires people. I had the privilege to interact with Governor Patrick in a 45-minute Zoom call with Clayton Spencer and Kathy Bieberstein. At the end of the call, I wanted to go find the biggest mountain I could and climb to the top of it. So please silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming Clayton Spencer and Deval Patrick.
I brought my Moxie. It's a test whether I will actually taste it before I
Okay, so good evening, everyone, and thanks to all of you who've taken time out of the tense election season to come do something else for a change. And it's great to have you here to participate in this conversation. And every encounter I've had with Governor Patrick gives me the confidence to say you're going to find it a real treat to hear from him. Welcome, Governor.
Thank you, Madam President.
It is wonderful to have you with us here up in Maine. As I was thinking about tonight, it occurred to me that if you guys down in Massachusetts hadn't overplayed your hand some 200 plus years ago, you might have been our governor too. Now, perhaps we were destined to go our separate ways, but it didn't help that Massachusetts got greedy. You lowballed us on the price they paid for our lumber to build their ships and then took the profits in Boston.
So that's what this is about.
Yeah.
We're settling scores tonight.
Yeah. Naturally, Mainers got fed up, and we peeled off to become our own state in 1820. So Massachusetts missed out on 3,500 miles of beautiful shoreline, and we missed out on your leadership. So tonight is not about settling scores. It's about getting to know the governor we never had.
You got a pretty good one, I think. Can I tell you a funny story?
Yeah.
When I was running the first time and going around the state to introduce myself, I was down in the South Coast area, so New Bedford, that part of the world. And the newspaper, remember there used to be newspapers. The newspaper that circulated there was the Providence, what was it called? Journal-Constitution, I think.
Something, yeah.
Yeah. Say it again? Providence Journal? Yeah. In Rhode Island. And it was at the time run by a peculiar fellow, a publisher, who was very cantankerous. And I went down and I visited with him. It's just him and me. And I had my cards. I was so nervous, and we hit it off. And he said, "You know what? I think I'm gonna have the paper endorse you." I thought, "Wow." He said, "On one condition." I said, "Yes, sir. What's that?" He said, "If you win, you have to annex Rhode Island." So apparently, there's a lot of feeling about state lines in this part of the world.
Yeah. As Vince Vaughn would say, we've got big feelings.
Yeah.
So Governor Patrick, it's an understatement to say you have a compelling life story and a rich and varied career. So we've got a lot of ground to cover, and we're just going to dive in. And I thought we would start with your service as governor of Massachusetts from 2007 to 2015. We're not going year by year, bill by bill through that, don't worry. And I want to use that as a jumping off point to learn about how you think about the various things you've done and where you find meaning in them, and I think we'll see where we do as well. I lived in Massachusetts when you first ran, and as I recall, there was a lot of head scratching about who this guy Deval Patrick was, who suddenly burst out onto the scene seemingly out of nowhere and cut in line ahead of people who had been desperately waiting since 1991 to see another Democratic governor elected. So I have several questions for you. First, nobody bursts out of nowhere. Everybody comes from somewhere. And you all of a sudden took a notion that you were going to run for governor after, as far as I can tell, now I combed the record, I didn't find you'd ever been on a school board, a town council. Did you run for president of your class at least?
No.
No, okay, so tell us a little bit about where you came from and how you got on this path.
The actual, and by the way, how long have we known each other? Can I call you Clayton? You call me Deval? I mean, that's what you...
But that doesn't feel respectful.
All right, pardon me.
I mean, you can call
Madam
me
President.
Clayton. No.
We're gonna keep this, we can be informal. You can call me Your Excellency if you like. I had not run for public office before. I had one public job before when I was head of the Civil Rights Division in the Justice Department. And I would say there was head scratching around my own kitchen table about it. But, and I hadn't grown up, always wanting to serve in public office. I grew up, I was a poor kid from the south side of Chicago. I had a great break to come to Massachusetts for school, and more or less stayed in Massachusetts for the 40-some-odd years since then. And Massachusetts had been good to me and my family. But I was working in Atlanta and commuting. At the time, I decided to leave and come back and run, and come back permanently and run, in part because, and John Kerry hates it when I tell this story, but in part because I was really frustrated, and I like John a lot, our former senator.
Yes.
In part because I was frustrated by his presidential campaign, which I was as involved in as I could be from my private sector perch, and I really wanted him to win. And I remember you remember he was being accused of flip-flopping on the Iraq War. It's hard for people to remember. There was a time when the Iraq War was popular.
Yeah.
Or supported.
Yeah.
And he and the 9/11 Commission finished their work the summer before the election, and one of their findings was that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and there never had been.
Right.
And at a press conference that afternoon, President Bush was asked the question, Mr. President, if you knew then what you know now, would you have ordered the invasion? And without hesitation, the president said, yes, I would have. He said, because we've rid the world of a dictator. Now, I know today that in politics is called a pivot. Yeah. You shift to your new justification. And then he said, go ask John Kerry. And for 3 days, John Kerry was asked on the trail, and he avoided the question. And everybody knew he was polling to figure out what his answer should be. And I'm not saying that the answer was obvious or easy, but it raised a question that had been bothering me for some while, whether you could actually run willing to lose, meaning your convictions were strong enough. Not wooden, it's not that you have to be right on everything, but really believing in something at the risk of losing an election, and whether folks were hungry for that kind of leadership in the way I was. So I thought, well, maybe I'll give it a go. And because I want ambitious agenda from our leaders, I thought, well, maybe I better run for a position where I can set the agenda. So that's what I did.
So I'm interested in that answer because you had later in that election, when you'd already blown the people out of the water who were in the primaries expecting to be the candidate, you won your primaries, but then you were up against Carrie Healy, I think, and something came up at that point about a letter you wrote to a probation, dealing with the probation of, objecting to the probation of somebody, and you were called on that. And I think Carrie Healy said, well, that's just words, something that you wrote. And I just thought it so resonates with what you just said about your motivation with can you speak from conviction? And I believe you went to the Boston Common and gave a speech about that.
Well, it's an interesting story. So I like Carrie here.
Yeah.
I didn't then, because I like her, but it was a nasty campaign, and we were getting hammered with negative ads, and we had, because I had done death penalty defense when I was at the Legal Defense Fund, and had learned a ton about how the criminal justice system actually works. I was firm in my opposition to the death penalty, and I'd been a trial lawyer, I had all kinds of clients. So that was a lot of the
So this was, you were objecting to somebody being executed?
Correct.
Okay, got it.
And there were, so I was getting the soft on crime thing, and
Yeah.
there was the ad that went up on television with a white woman walking alone to her car in a garage at night, and a shadowy figure in the background, and scary music, and
Yeah.
I was supposed to be the reason to be scared.
Yeah.
And I got lots of advice from our folks to hit back, because that's what you do. And I said, we're not going to do that, because so many people had come to the campaign because it was a positive campaign. In fact, kids, school-age kids, came to the campaign and helped out, and they brought their parents. And I said, we can't betray that and them by going negative. But I should explain what this is about. And the just words thing, which is funny, it wasn't funny then, but the attacks got very personal. There was an attack on my sister and her then husband, her late husband. He lost his job. It was bad.
Oh, wow.
And their children learned things about private things, unsavory things about their past as a couple that their children didn't know. So it was hard on all of us. In any event, at a forum, we were each asked to say something favorable about the other. And I was asked to go first, and I said, well, I've actually met Carrie Healy's mother, who was in a retirement facility up in Danvers, I think, and I'd gone a couple times. And she was great and asked really pointed questions. And I said, I'm working on getting her vote, but she's a great person. And I said, and nobody who comes from a mom like that can be so bad. And then Carrie Healy was asked, and she said, well, he can give a good speech. It's just words. And that's what that was about. And so it was, I didn't know the term throwing shade.
Yeah.
But she was throwing, did I say it right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because sometimes I say casting shade, and that's not right. You're supposed to say throw shade, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she was throwing shade, and even I knew it. So we had an event out on the Common where I talked about what the attacks had meant and why we were not responding, and I answered this bit about just words and what became an infamous speech. You know why, right?
I do, but
Yes.
I bet they don't.
Well, so I had a friend of many years whom I'd met 15 years before he ran for anything, named Barack Obama. And that first year in office, when I was in office, he'd just gotten to the Senate, and he decided he was going to run for president. And he announced, and the campaign was people don't remember, it just was out of gas in the summer of 2007. Nothing. I mean, Hillary Clinton, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
Right? And we went to see them down on the vineyard when they were on holiday, and I said to Diane on the way over, she said, Diane's my wife. She said, he's going to ask for your endorsement. And I said, well, of course I'm going to endorse him, but I did work for Bill Clinton, and they'd been calling, and what are you going to do? And and all that. So we talked about it that night, and as we were getting up, he said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, of course I'm going to be with you. He said, well, do you have any advice? And I said, I have 3 things. I'd written them out on a little piece of scrap paper. I said, first of all, run at the grassroots, because not just because it's tactically important, but because the gesture of respect is so important. It's the thing I will tell you, it's the reason Trump is strong today. He speaks to everybody. Not well, not in complete sentences, not even politely, but he speaks to everybody. I said, so run at the grassroots. I said, run willing to lose, meaning stand for something. And I said, the third thing is that you are going to be accused at some point as just being a guy who can give good speech. I was too. Here's how I responded, and I'll send you the speech. Little did I know he would use the same speech, these same words later on.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that became a thing for a minute.
Well, I think we're going to get off of just stories, but I just want to give you guys a sense of the context. Governor Patrick mentioned having worked for Clinton, and you kind of wonder, how did Clinton even know who you were?
I sued him. I used to work at the Legal Defense Fund in New York, and there I did death penalty work,
Yeah.
and voting rights work. And I worked with a brilliant lawyer on the voting rights docket named Lonnie Guinier.
Oh, yeah.
And Lonnie and I filed a lawsuit against I guess it's the election board in Arkansas, which is nominally the governor, the other constitutional officers, and then we had a defendant class, which was unusual, of all the county clerks. And it was about access to registration. And I did, because I was the junior lawyer, I did all the work. And I ended up negotiating the terms of the settlement with Governor Clinton. We got to know each other. He had known Lonnie for a long time. And I met Mrs. Clinton at Lonnie's wedding on the Vineyard the summer after the case was over. The fun part was that the features of the settlement agreement became the motor voter law when the president when Clinton became president. And then, of course, we all expected what he did, which is to nominate Lonnie to head the Civil Rights Division, and that nomination was withdrawn after controversy that would blow people's minds. Do you remember what it was over?
Wasn't it quotas? No.
This wild idea called ranked choice voting,
Oh, seriously?
which she had written about as a democratic tool, a way to create moderation and competition.
Wow.
And it was considered so radical. I mean, it was an excuse.
Yeah.
I was the president's third choice because he tried somebody else afterwards, and then they got around to me.
Well, I'd say they did okay.
Thank you.
So you're running, you've achieved some degree of plausibility, but how did you pull this off? I mean, you had a very well-established Healy. You had busted by your chief primary opponent. How did you know what to do in that first
I didn't.
I
really didn't. You mean when I got the job or when I was trying to get the job?
when you were trying to get the job.
I didn't know what to do. I mean, I knew what I yearned for as a citizen. And I think I was trying to approach it that way. In fact, I had noticed, and I still do in many respects, that when I am with candidates who are making their pitch, they often spend their time talking about how they're going to win, not why they should. And I wanted to hear why. And so when I was talking to folks who, including, and most importantly, the fellow who became my campaign manager, who was brilliant and had never run a statewide campaign before. But he is the one who told me that the method I was talking about was called grassroots campaigning, because I wanted to listen to people. I wanted them to know me. I wanted to know them. You just get a feel. So many campaigns are about raising money to build a relationship with voters through TV ads in the last few weeks of the campaign. And I understand that. It's just, it doesn't feel enough. And so we ran a grassroots campaign in part for tactical reasons, because that was the only way to break into our very tight, inward-looking political establishment in Massachusetts, but also for philosophical reasons. And I said to John Walsh, my campaign manager, I said, look, I want to concentrate on why. I said, I want you to concentrate on how. And it was he who came up, and then, we had two great advisors when we got further along, called David Axelrod and David Plouffe. And then they took what we did and scaled it for Barack's first campaign, and then they came back, or David came back and helped with the re-elect, and we took some of their stuff and we were iterating off of each other each time, which was fun.
That's great. So why don't you talk a little bit now, and we'll come back to some of the other specifics, but I actually had never thought about grassroots campaigning as anything but tactical. And you're framing it as philosophical first, and then executing as a tactical strategy is a new concept for me. And I am just really interested, and I bet the audience will be too, in understanding what that philosophy is. I mean, really, what are you doing there?
Well, so there are a couple things in the way we practiced or tried to practice grassroots organizing and campaigning, but it was very much about making the campaign as intimate as possible, and having enough time in the running around to listen to people and learn. Because I thought I had and think I have a lot of great ideas, but no one person, no one party has a corner on all the best ideas. And I was also keen not to run to be governor of the Democrats. I was trying to be governor of everybody. And that meant I had to go and hear from folks who didn't agree, or thought they didn't, or presumed that, all that stuff. I think I learned I got some insights from that, and I still do, that were, it's hard to trace a direct line, but were very important to how I thought about governing and do. And I'll give you an example.
Okay.
When I was out in the Berkshires in western Massachusetts, I would hear from people about how they thought that Beacon Hill, where our state house is just about the neighborhood around Beacon Hill. And they're unseen out there. And then I'd go to central Massachusetts, I'd hear the same thing. I'd go down the Cape and Islands, same thing. North Shore, Merrimack Valley, same thing. Roxbury, walking distance from Boston, the same thing. And I'm persuaded from that, and was persuaded from that the political dynamic in Massachusetts is not Democrat, Republican, it's insider, outsider. By the way, it's true all over the country.
Yeah.
It's true all over the country. Most of us feel like we're on the outside. And just look at it now, right? If you, in the presidential election, if you don't live in a battleground state, you could easily think this thing doesn't have anything to do with me.
Right.
Right? If you're a Democrat in a so-called red state, I hate these terms, but a Republican in a so-called blue state, nobody talks to you. They come to Massachusetts because we're an ATM. That's the only reason the campaigns come.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the only reason they come, and they come a lot for that reason. And I think it's I always thought Howard Dean had it right when he talked about a 50-state strategy. We have to be, not just at campaign time, but all the time, building community. And by the way, you learn things about what the agenda really ought to be, about what the language that you talk about at the agenda really ought to be. You learn stories that help bring the reason for the agenda to life. So I just think it's soulless without the grassroots, for me anyhow.
Yeah, well, I'm also interested in in how and when, I mean, the degree to which the why does this matter? Why am I out running for this? Why does it, what matters to you and why? The notion that there's a substantive set of purposes that you're pursuing, and it would be great to hear you talk about that. I mean, you've explained to different audiences that you're a Black patriot, and that's a pretty stark juxtaposition. So how do you think about all of this?
I don't know if it's stark. I've said it's a high-risk position to love a country that doesn't always love you back. But, you know, my third-grade educated grandparents, refugees from the Jim Crow South, believed in the promise of America. They believed it. They believed that their day, their time would come, if not in their lifetime, in mine or my kids. They believed it. You look at slave narratives. They believed that opportunity and equality would be available one day. Yeah. And, you know, by multiple gestures of grace, I've experienced a lot of that. And while it was always true that there were plenty of other kids on the south side of Chicago just as ambitious and just as, you know, hopeful and so forth, who didn't get their break, and I know that to be true in every neighborhood everywhere, I did get mine, and I can see a way, and part of what I learned growing up was that those who have a way make a way. You know, you have a generational responsibility. That's how it works. You're supposed to leave things better for those who come behind you. And I've tried to bring that way of being, not just to my jobs, private or public sector, but to my life. And it just felt like there was a moment where I could offer that on a larger stage. And if you think about it really, frankly, most of the big challenges that face humankind today, they suffer, or they are what they are because they have suffered from a lack of leadership, from an unwillingness to do something more than sort of accumulate your political capital, right? But rather spend it, because that's what it takes to actually get stuff.
And risking it from the get-go.
Risking it. Look, I do not take away from the folks who make politics their career. They're amazing people who serve in office as a career. I had the benefit of it not being my career, so I could just focus on the job. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you like being governor?
Not every day. Oh, it's crazy. Not every day, but there were some amazing ways. I don't miss it. You know, we don't have term limits. I have a term limit named Diane. You know. And she said 2 terms, and you better get your butt back home. Yeah. And I will say, I did miss the private sector on payday, in particular. Yeah. Yeah. But it was an amazing experience. In ways that it's hard to explain. You know, people ask me, you know, what do you feel was your biggest legislative accomplishment or what have you, and I can do those. But there was a way in which, on the worst days, these little gestures, these little things. I remember in the beginning we were making all these dumb amateur mistakes, and somebody here is from Massachusetts, they remember. I was loading, you know, at that point I was being driven around by the state police, and I was loading groceries into the back of the truck. And this woman I'd never seen before and never seen since rolled up, put her window down, and she said, "Governor," she said, "don't let them break your spirit." That was it. And it was like, okay. Yeah. You know. We had more than a couple of really hard things, with maybe the marathon bombing being one of the hardest. And I had to ask people to do things that they weren't required to do, that they weren't, that I didn't have the authority in every case to do. Sometimes it was just show acts of kindness to one another so that we can heal. That is a part of it too. And the responses that we got, the way that people behaved and lifted one another and understood that they had, we belong to each other. We are a community, and we turn to and not on each other. And that was a beautiful thing to see under more than one occasion when we were invited to behave differently.
Yeah, yeah. And that was an enormous crisis that demanded all the reflexes and speed and communication of crisis. Did you know what to do? It was in 2013, I think, and it was pretty early in your tenure.
No, it was near the end.
Oh, it was that's right. It's in the site. Yeah, that's right.
It was near the end.
Sorry, I was thinking, yeah.
And did I know what to do? No, I didn't. We had some advantages, actually. I didn't mean to turn it to the bombing, but we had some advantages in the sense that it was near the end, and the emergency management teams we had managed other emergencies together.
Yeah.
Nothing quite like that,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we knew each other.
Yeah,
We hadn't had anything that was, as they say, multi-jurisdictional, right?
Yeah.
We had every federal, state, and local agency at our disposal, including a number at the federal level that I'd never heard of.
Yeah.
And you're not supposed to hear of. So I'm
Yeah.
not going to
yeah.
repeat them. But when I think about the fact that we had, it's interesting today. You look back on it and we say, okay, 2 guys, 2 bombs, 2 terrorist needles in a haystack in 100 hours.
Right.
We didn't know that until a couple of weeks after it was over, meaning we didn't know how many people, how many more bombs. There's so much more that the public didn't know and didn't need to know.
Yeah.
But everyone brought their best, including regular citizens. And this was why I brought up the example, because after the first bombing, after the first press conference that afternoon, when I had no answers to anything, but there was so much media and you had to go out and just say something. By the way, the very first question was from a reporter named Alex Jones.
Oh, wow.
He said, Governor, the question was something like, was all this a setup? There were bodies and body parts still on Boylston Street when he asked me this.
Yeah.
And I just, okay, breathe.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just want to slap somebody.
Yeah. So you've talked about the private sector. You've talked about not being a career politician. So you've done your own version of the weave in and out of government, being a straight lawyer, government service, business, and then an elected official. And I think it would be really interesting to hear. Obviously, there's a set of skills you bring that must be a through line there, and there are also different kinds of demands in the different situations. What I would love to hear from you is how the experiences, and let's just talk about government one way or the other and private sector, relate to each other. Right now, you're back in the private sector, mm-hmm. and I assume you don't put all your purposes on hold when you're doing that. So let's talk a little bit about what you're up to now.
Well, so right now I'm doing impact investing at a firm called the Vistria Group in Chicago, which was launched when we started our impact fund at Bain Capital when I left office. And we're focusing, and so I've known these folks for a long time. We've done deals together over the years. And what we are about is investing in 3 sectors: middle market, for-profit companies, health and wellness, knowledge and learning, which is what we call education, and financial services, all about access. We also have a real estate fund that's doing affordable and workforce housing. And it is about growing profitable companies in ways where we can show measurable social, environmental good and competitive, indeed superior returns. And people choose all sorts of points on that spectrum of returns. You don't have to do superior returns. I want to do superior returns because I want to prove it was a false choice all along.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to trade being a good, responsible, effective employer and member of the community for returns. In fact, I think there's a premium for that kind of way of being in business. And I'm not I'm a capitalist. I'm not a market fundamentalist, right? I don't think markets solve every problem in everybody's life right on time or anything. But I think it is, again, when you think about the size and the scale of the scope of the challenges that face us all, they're not going to be solved by one sector all on its own. It's going to require collaborative problem solving. It's going to require the private sector stepping up and not just doing what it does and leaving the trouble for governments and not-for-profit sector to fix.
So you've been in it long enough. Have you noticed a progression in the capacity and willingness for government to work with you as partners in this?
Some. I mean, we're mostly not working with governments except on the real estate side.
Right.
I'm just trying to check whether what I just said is accurate. Actually, we have a bunch of government customers for some of our education companies, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, it's so interesting. This will come as a shock to some. Most of government is already outsourced, right? Much of it is contracted with enterprise of one kind or another. So one of the things we say around the office at Vistria Group is, whereas a lot of investors may run from government or from policy, we run to policy. We're very interested in where the intersection is between policy and private sector capacity, and how the companies that we are looking for and investing in and helping to strengthen are able to meet that need.
Are you getting a growing set of professionals who are engaged in this? And
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, for an awful lot of the young people coming out of school, coming out of business school, they want to do this sort of work, right? Because it aligns with a generation that is teaching us about better choices, about, where to shop, what to eat, how to drive, all the rest of it. And what fun,
So I wanted to see if you would talk for a minute. I mean, we're in a leadership election in this country, and there's a lot of concern about what good leadership is, what leadership we need, etc. You have stunningly been in leadership positions in all these different pieces of your life, and I'm curious about what you think it takes to be a good leader. If you've got ideas about how you would frame up, I mean, we kind of know who our two candidates are at the moment. We're not here to talk about the current election or the horse race, but how do you see this country now, where there's a lot of discussion about both the style and the substance of our politics, and we're at a moment. How would you frame this up based on a life of?
Wow.
I mean, and start simple. What leaders have you admired? What characteristics have you drawn on in your roles that every time you're going back to this, and then you learn that? I just think it would be interesting to hear your reflections.
Well, acknowledging that they are the reflections of a flawed leader, because I think almost all leaders are.
Aren't we all? Yeah.
I think humility is a pretty important leadership quality, and curiosity. You know, back to this point that, you know, you may have a lot of great ideas, but nobody has a corner on all the best ideas. And there might be some idea, you know, out of the mouths of babes even, that it turns out to be a really profound and important and timely idea. And so the humility and patience to listen, and means to listen for that, to look for those ideas, I think is enormously important. I hate I mean, I should be clear, I'm a Kamala Harris guy. And I'm a Democrat, but I'm not the sort of Democrat who thinks you have to hate Republicans to be a good Democrat. I think we get a lot of false choices in politics today. You know, that's one of them.
Yeah.
You know, you gotta hate business to care about social justice. You gotta destroy the economy to save the planet. You know, you gotta hate the police to believe Black Lives Matter. Come on. Don't get me started. Well, I don't want to go to, but there's so many, and you have to be on one side or another in order to express conviction, rather than to have conviction alongside humility and acknowledge there might actually be something there. I mean, I think probably it is true that all of the racists voted in 2016 for Trump. But I don't believe that all the people who voted for Trump are racist.
Right.
I think there are folks who feel heard by him and not by others. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. And I think we'd be better on our side if we were better at acknowledging that. And by the way, if we had a permanent grassroots organization, we'd know that.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't be figuring it out by trying to read the entrails of the latest poll. So I sort of hate the way we politic today. I hate, and particularly at the national level. I hate how impersonal it feels and how much money there is in it. And if it was always true that politics was some blend of substance and performance art, now it feels like you can do it all with just performance art. And I think most of us outsiders, we feel that.
Yeah.
We have a project we started at the Kennedy School at Harvard called Shared America. It was a deep listening project. Did I tell you about this before?
No.
Because I had a hunch that we are less divided than we are portrayed. There are a lot of incentives for portraying us as divided. And frankly, there are a lot of incentives, financial and otherwise, to divide us. But I had a hunch that we might not be as divided as we think we are, or as we are shown. And we did what we call a deep listening project all over the country, and we learned a ton of encouraging stuff, so much so that we spun it out as a C3, and we're working on how to fix the problem.
You willing to preview us a little bit?
Well, a little bit. I
Couple
mean, first,
things?
it turns out that a whole lot of people from a whole lot of different backgrounds are really curious about and want to work with other Americans who are different, so long as they don't first have to surrender or disavow all their views in order to do so. So they don't want to have to. Democrats or Republicans don't want to work with the other party because they're working cross-party. They want to work with other people who are trying to accomplish something.
Yeah.
And they don't want to first have to say, well, I do or don't agree on the question of choice or on DEI or something before they do. They just want to, and they want to know people who are different than they are. I was deeply concerned whether there are still ties that bind us.
Right.
I will say that there are three values that or aspirations about this country that just came out over and over and over again in this work. One that was not surprising was freedom. But the other two were opportunity and equality. And if you hear, you think of the image that comes to your mind or to many people's minds of I hate these terms, but just for shorthand, because I don't like shorthand, as you can tell by the babbling, but the MAGA guy in the West who says equality. I believe in equality. I think that's what this country is about. I believe in that. And says it with conviction, and says it with other of his pals or her pals in the room. And we were getting this everywhere. And people in a way, they're sort of losing our civic faith, our faith in our civic values, and they're questioning whether we actually share those values. And some of it, I think, there's a lot of good work going on in the emerging democracy field, the bridging field. That's all really important. What we think is missing is the narrative work, because we have been taught certain things that have become conventional wisdom. We've been taught. Pick an example. The government is bad and bloated. You'd be astonished the level of creativity and brilliant improvisation that goes on in governments everywhere with very little money. The sense of service that folks who work in government bring. There's some outliers, but I can tell you there's some outliers and lazy people in industry too.
Yeah. Anyway.
Turns out, right.
Yeah.
But that's not the narrative we've been sold, right? Business is efficient. Yeah. So I think we have to regain. I don't think it's an old narrative; it's an updated narrative. We're still trying to figure out what that is and how to draw it from the, as it were, the bottom up instead of the top down. But that's what we're working on now.
So I want to make sure we've got time to hear questions from the audience, and I think Tom or Kathy, if you have other guidance, that we were going to up the lights and let people call on people in the audience. Is that right? Okay. So
I brought my glasses, so I.
Yeah. So we've got about 20 good minutes to further pick the governor's brain. Okay. Yes.
Hello.
Jeff Thaler. I have a very clear memory of you giving a speech, not in Massachusetts, but in South Portland, Maine, in which I think you had consumed Moxie before you went on stage.
Was I a little sluggish?
No, you were very dynamic. You had the crowd whipped up. This was a campaign speech for Barack Obama. And my question is, given your thoughtfulness, everything you've been talking about, did you ever consider, after finishing your term as governor, even though your wife said stop, of running for Senate or eventually president? And if not then, what about in the next 5 or 7 years? You're still only 68.
Well, I see our time is up. I've really enjoyed Jeff, right? Thank you for the question. So I actually did run for president, but just for 15 minutes. And we had a plan that we had, not when I left office, but some years later. I guess this would have been in the 2020 cycle. And Diane, we did some homework. We thought hard about it. We put a plan together. We had some folks who were helping us. We had a kickoff date. I think right after Thanksgiving of that year before the election, and Diane was diagnosed with uterine cancer the week before, and it turns they got it early. She's great. She's cancer-free. Praise God. But we didn't know that then, and you can't jump off. It's just too consuming with that kind of uncertainty. So that was then. I don't know how to run for president now. I feel like the whole social media has changed so much. And, you know, I think when you are trying to introduce yourself, if you aren't given the benefit of the doubt, but the image has already been created for you and blasted out, I just don't know how to do that if you're not. There's so much about running for president today that is about celebrity. And I'm not interested in celebrity. And there's some really great people out there, you know. And I also think, you know, maybe it's time for younger people to step up. Because we have some great young people with some terrific ideas as well. I resent that. Yeah, sorry. Sure.
Thank you very much for bringing this spirit of down to earth, down on the earth plane this evening to all of us.
Thank you.
When you mentioned the word humility, it brought to mind the concept of servant leadership, and I'd love to hear your sort of your take, how that fits into your cosmos.
I love that term, and when I teach 2 leadership courses at the Kennedy School, and that is my focus, what it means to be about the people you serve rather than about you, and frankly, how much more meaning there is in that way of approaching these jobs. I'll tell you, I had this experience when we were trying to do sentencing reform in Massachusetts. We were trying to move away from the, 3 strikes and you're out stuff. And interesting factoid, the leaders on this were Republican governors, not Democratic governors, right? Because we were still cowering from being accused of soft on crime. And Republican governors were saying, we can't afford this. We got to do something else. So it was a lot to get the legislature to come in our direction. And we were out trying to get a sense in community conversations what people thought about. And one of the ideas I was given in those conversations that wasn't on our agenda was something called Corey reform, which was about changing the access to the criminal offender records index for people who were out looking for jobs, because as soon as they said they'd had a conviction, no matter what their qualifications, they couldn't get anywhere. So we put that in the bill. And when that part of the bill passed, we went out to Roxbury to sign the bill. And we went to this place called Freedom House, which I think has since been torn down, but it had a big auditorium or hall in the basement for about 150 people, and there were 300 people in there. No air conditioning on the hottest day in the history of time. And the fire chief and fire marshal was about to shut it all down. I said, no, I just got to get in here and sign this bill and make a few remarks. And the state police trying to make a quarter as I get up to the table and I sign and I make some remarks. But they're euphoric in the hall. And on the way out, this guy gave me his cell phone. And he said, Governor, say hello to my friend. I'm still trying to go out and take the cell phone. And the guy on the other end says, Governor, thanks for signing this bill. I know it's going to make a difference. And I said, well, make the most of it. And I handed the phone back. 4 years later, I'm in the western part of the state. We stop at a new restaurant in downtown Springfield to get takeout on the way to an event. And this guy came up in chef's togs, and he does a double take. I always said I got a double take because I'm taller on TV. And people couldn't understand. He said, why is he so small? And he said, are you Governor Patrick? I said, yes, I am. He said, do you remember signing that Corey bill? I said, sure, I remember that. He said, do you remember talking to a guy on a cell phone that day? I said, I beg your pardon? I think so. He said, I was that guy. I said, excuse me? He said, I was in jail when you took that call. He said, I got out, I got a job as a result. He said, I want you to know I'm the executive chef of this restaurant right now.
Oh, wow.
That is the sort of thing, over and over again I had that experience. That is what I mean. That is the gift you get from servant leadership.
That's great. We got time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where am I going?
Uh,
Down front?
Yeah.
Sure.
Hello.
There really should be one per customer in this row. Well, there are other people here.
We're different customers.
Oh,
Customers. My name is Joanne Berg, and I'm really uplifted by your talk
Thank
and
you.
the things you speak to and the people that you're helping. And I just wondered if you've written a book that perhaps we could read and others could read with this message in it, relaying your career and your thoughts.
I have written 2 little books. One, I think, is just an audio form, but the other is around. It's called A Reason to Believe. It's not I wrote it, I think, in my first year in office. It's not a book about politics or a tell-all. I haven't written that book. I got stuff. I'm unlikely to write that book. But it's more life lessons, really. Some of the things and experiences that have informed the man I'm trying to become. Maybe that's the way to put it. Yeah.
Is there another question?
Let's see, 1 and 2. Okay. 2.
As a capitalist and an educator, I'm wondering what you're gleaning from your students these days in the midst of all this rather chaotic political scene.
Yeah.
What's your takeaway with the students that you come in contact with?
It's such an. Is this recorded? I'm fascinated. So I teach at the Kennedy School at Harvard, and the students are fascinating. They have much more certainty than they do actual experience. You know what I'm saying? They're very certain about stuff.
Is that the Harvard thing or the Kennedy School thing?
I don't know. It might be. It might be. They're brilliant, and they have very strong views, which I love that. They are fighting, I think, like a lot of young people, maybe a lot of the rest of us too, how not to, I guess the way I challenge them is not to confuse cynicism with sophistication. There's a way we have of being kind of offhand and matter of fact and dismissive that it isn't really sophistication. It's really just a protective code against disappointment, you know? But cynicism produces nothing. There isn't a single advance in human history that is the result of cynicism. It was hopefulness and imagination and possibility that explains our steps forward. And I think students who have all that capacity waste it if they don't resist the cynicism, as hard as it is. And so that's the kind of thing that my students and I have going on, which is why I'm not teaching this fall.
Was there another?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
My name is Mary Nelson. Thank you, Governor,
Thank you,
for
Mary.
being here and for all of your really inspirational comments. They mean a lot to all of us.
Thank you.
I have a question which is maybe it's a forever question, but it seems to be so present now, and that is the lies that are everywhere in society, from politicians, from on the internet. And it's very hard, particularly for those who are getting all their information from the internet, to distinguish between the truth and the lies. Do you have any thoughts about how we can address that?
I don't know. I was asked at the beginning of the Biden administration to co-chair an independent commission on the future of tech. And I wondered then, and still do, why I was asked to do it, because I am not a techie. We had access to everybody. And I learned a ton about how information on the internet flows and who is accountable for what. And the answers are hardly anybody for hardly anything. What I did come to understand, though, because I'm very sensitive to this question of free speech, what I did come to understand is that we have conflated free speech with free reach, right? You can say whatever you want, but you're not entitled to have that amplified. We conflate those, and frankly, we've been the tech leadership have been brilliant at conflating those. But those things can actually be separated, and separating them would help, right? So say what you want, but an algorithm that says the nastier, I say something kind about you, Mary, the 2, 3, 4 people who follow me on whatever would know. If I call you everything but a child of God, instantly it's everywhere, because it's tuned to do that. It's tuned to do that, but it doesn't have to be. It's just and there are actually some great bipartisan ideas in the Congress. There's some terrific legislation in the Congress, particularly based on the considerable research about the impact on young people and their development and their hopefulness and what have you. But so little moves or has moved in the Congress. I hope it comes back in the next. On the way back?
Good evening.
Hi.
I'm interested in your thoughts on what Jaylen Brown is doing out of Boston. He's such an incredible superstar sports figure, but he's also building foundations and fundraising and what have you to build a better Black presence in Boston.
Yep.
And in
Black
my
Wall Street
mind's
is also
eye,
well. Yeah.
he is an incredible leader, a very unique and rare leader. And I'd like to know what else the private sector could do to get more visibility on it and to repeat it elsewhere.
The private sector could do to get more
visibility to what he's doing.
Yeah.
And repeat it, replicate it in other areas.
Yeah.
And people may not all know who this is, so we might want
Jaylen Brown is one of the stars of the Boston Celtics.
Right.
He's young. He's been in Boston now for a while. He's committed to Boston, which is not a place that necessarily is always welcoming to people that are different. And so I just am curious what you think about what he's accomplishing today.
Yeah. Did you see he went to the Epiphany School today? Or yesterday? Do you know the Epiphany School? You know the Epiphany School, don't you? Mm-mm. It's an amazing school in Dorchester where the only requirement for admission is that you live below the poverty line.
Oh, wow.
And it started as a middle school. Diane's chair of the board now, but we've been involved since its founding. And they send kids to Exeter, and it's been now 25 years, I think, and students have come back. They're now on the faculty. They live close to the school and so on, 6 days a week, 3 meals a day for kids and their families. And he went there to call attention to, that to me is brilliant use of celebrity, to call attention to the Epiphany School. Until I think a couple weeks ago, he was the highest paid NBA player. And when he was announced, he said what he wanted to do was to start to create Black Wall Street in Boston, which was huge. He and I text. I've never shaken his hand. We've been trying for years to get together. But I think he's being very thoughtful, to your point, about how to create opportunity, and he's mindful that, which I love, that Black boys in particular look to him and people like him who are sports figures as their path to success, and showing that there's more you can do other things than be a pro baller, which I love. I don't know how far he's gotten in terms of making his other investments of money. I do know where he's investing his time, and it's showing up, I think, as a surprise at the event. But the media knew. It's just the kids didn't know. It was a surprise to them, and it had a huge impact. They'll be talking about this for a long time, I'm sure. But who's a marvelous example from a different generation is Magic,
Yeah.
who's built an incredible economic engine in LA.
Got another question over here.
Yeah.
Hi, Governor. My name's Amelia. Thank you
Amelia?
for this discussion. I've worked in climate for 15 years, mostly under white men, leaders of businesses, actually in Boston. And in my hunt to find impact, I have discovered that there is something about male leadership and the healing that we can do with male leadership in terms of helping men find emotional depth and range that is really important to how we address the big issues. And I wonder about how you might describe like the ways that you're holding yourself with all of this experience and wisdom that you've collected, in terms of how open you're able to be with your leadership, in terms of allowing folks to see and feel your interiority.
Wow. Amelia, I'm learning. I'm also not in leadership right now, so I'm a whole lot less, bundled up. I was raised by women, and I married up, so I'm definitely kept humble. But there are things I think I've come to understand that I was fortunate, I think, Amelia, to relatively early to realize that I wanted to have meaning not just after hours, but in my work. And I wanted, whatever I did, I wanted it to be meaningful and to be impactful. And that I could have the most impact and probably have the most meaning by sharing the leadership with others and frankly, getting smarter people than me around me to make me better and to make us better. And I think there's something in the letting go and the not the heroic leader, but the servant leader that is a lot more resonant for me, and I think actually a lot more, it's more lasting in terms of the impact. Maybe not, people don't remember you were the guy, but they remember what happened and what is happening, what lasts. And I hope that's along the journey you're talking about. I still have a wicked temper, but I'm a crybaby. By the way, have you seen Wild Robot yet?
No.
Oh my God. I'm about to cry just describing it. And we have grandkids now, and they tease me about it's like with Wild Robot. Is Poppy crying yet? So
Well,
so I'm on my journey.
I think we're all going to cry now because we've reached the end of the hour, and Tom, maybe you won't cry on that one. Tom keeps this.
I just want to say, in my 3 years with Freeport Speech, this is one of my favorite evenings.
Oh.
That's
so kind. Thank you.
There's a sign-up sheet by the door of all of you who want to join me climbing a huge mountain inspired by our two speakers tonight. Thank you, Deval. Thank you, Clayton. This has been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. You're fabulous. Thank you.